Hi, everybody. So I wanted to just comment a little bit about the assignment that you guys did for transitions and narration. So first off, with transitions, it's really important for us as we're writing, and a lot of you guys recognize this in your reflection, to really use lots of transitions. I think sometimes people put transitions kind of just like at the beginning of each body paragraph, and what I was hoping that you guys were noticing when you were looking at these two essays is that the transitions were kind of sprinkled everywhere. They're kind of all over the essay, and so really kind of thinking about transitions of not necessarily just using the kind of formulaic transitional words, which is what I've offered you guys here with this chart with all these different kind of formulaic transitions, meaning they can just kind of go into lots of different paragraphs, but also kind of creating what I'm going to call custom transitions. And that's this stuff down here. And this is the more kind of sophisticated transitioning that we saw happening in both Gibbs and in Lake Tom. So using those demonstrative pronouns, this, that, these, those. So what does that actually look like? That looks like something like this. So when we see Gibbs writing that ideal runs so strong. Sorry, I can't highlight the sentence. There we go. That ideal runs so strong. That ideal is referencing the previous paragraph. So that the idealized version, I'm trying to grab it, there it is. And in the same example here that we see the demonstrative pronoun being used there, we also see, I'm sorry, that's the relative pronoun. We see that pronoun being used there. We also see here Gibbs developing this notion of a metaphor. And so she's comparing now family dinners with a regular worship service. And as we're reading through this text, we see her doing that, kind of weaving that metaphor throughout the entire text, a really, really sophisticated transitional structure that you can use. I'm just going to call out a couple of these other demonstrative relative pronouns. So she's got this one here again, yet for all of that, and that's going to reference that last line of the previous paragraph. So it's really important to kind of think about transitions, not just happening at the very beginning of your paragraph, which we see Nancy Gibbs doing, but they're kind of littered throughout the entire piece, throughout within the paragraph itself, and then also in these other more sophisticated ways, which includes using that kind of metaphor, developing a metaphor. Okay, so one thing I really want you guys focusing on, is oftentimes something that I comment on, especially for people who don't really write very frequently, is really doing kind of a concentrated effort at some point during your drafting stage to really kind of work on transitions. And I hope you guys use this document to help you out. The other thing I had you guys thinking about in this assignment is narration. And to get at narration, I also wanted to talk about the very, very important critical thinking skill, which is evaluation. When we evaluate something, we don't want to just say we like something or we don't like something. We have to do these first two steps. Super, super important. And I'm going to say that first step is probably the most important thing, is to figure out what's the function of the things that you're trying to evaluate. So if you're trying to evaluate, I used really a more kind of accessible example here rather than narration. I thought that might be a little bit abstract to jump right into narration. I use this thing of butts by a car. So if we think about function, it's easier to kind of think about, well, what are the different functions of owning a vehicle? Why would you want to own a vehicle? So you might want to own a vehicle because you need to kind of move your family from one place to another. So you might need a car that has lots of room for seating. You might want a car just for commuting, right? And then you're not caring so much about how many seats, passenger seats there are. You might want a vehicle for hauling things. So we want to make sure that we're always creating our criteria based off of the function, because obviously we're going to have a different set of criteria for a car that's a commuting car than for a car that is used for hauling things around. We could also look at, like, let's say you wanted to go to get your BA somewhere, and so your function off of that might be, you might want to, kind of the if you're thinking about your college experience, you might have kind of different kind of expectations or different desires for what you want that college experience to look like, and so depending on that function, we're going to have different kind of criteria. So really, really important to kind of think about the function there whenever we're evaluating anything. So in this case, we were evaluating the use of narration. Now, narration is a mode of development that oftentimes we don't think about using in academic writing, but it's actually one of the most powerful things we can do. And I think a lot of people recognize that. When I asked you guys what your favorite readings were, a lot of people were like, I really like Staples, which was a narration, or a lot of people said, I really like Hutman. Hers is a narration as well. And so when we think about the kind of power behind narration, the reason why it's so powerful is because it's telling a story. And as human beings, we love stories. We like to hear the different stories that people, or different experiences people have had, especially when they're told in kind of a story form. And so when we're using narration, I'm going to absolutely encourage you guys, you can use narration in your essays, but we want to make sure we're in charge of the narration. A common problem for people who are just kind of trying out using narration is it can kind of get out of control. And there's this, all of a sudden there's this big giant paragraph that's really talking about all these different details that really don't matter to whatever the point of the narration is. So we have to make sure, first and foremost, we know what we're doing. So our very first criteria, we have a meaningful purpose. Why are we narrating this? And making sure we only give details that support that purpose. Readers are kind of tenacious. We talked about that as well. And so if you start to give them details that aren't necessarily connected to the purpose, they're going to go follow that rabbit trail and they're going to try to figure out why those details are there. And if they can't figure it out and they're trying to kind of come back to this, what does this detail have to do with what you're trying to accomplish with the narration, they're going to lose trust in you. It's going to affect your credibility, your ethos in your piece. So we want to make sure that we always stick to the details, only put the details in that are connecting to the purpose. Clear context. So this one is really important, and sometimes it's hard for people to get at what I mean by clear context. And so this semester, I'm having you guys look at the Carson essay, and I did that on purpose, where a lot of people, when they evaluated Carson, they were like, I didn't understand it. I was really confused. It didn't have a clear context, and I really was happy to see that people saw that. The reason why it didn't have a clear context is because I pulled it out of context. So that was actually the first chapter from the book Silent Spring. And so if you guys didn't know that, you're reading this narration, it doesn't make any sense to you. So that's really important, that clear context, making sure that people understand why, in what context this narration is actually happening and what's the purpose. I think those context and purpose are really, really closely linked. Okay, so that's what I wanted to talk about for this activity that you guys did on transitions and narration. Both of these techniques are super, super important, using lots of transitions in your own writing. And also don't be afraid of using narration. We just got to make sure we keep it under control. All right, you guys, let me know if you have questions. We'll talk soon.